Hello, Trinont Life Agents. My name is Veronica Juncer, and I am recording this quick little training for you guys to talk about the CNA process and how I flow through a CNA when I'm sitting with a client. So I've got some good stuff that I'm going to go through with you today, but I also have some visuals of what I bring with me to every single CNA. And then I'm going to walk through over the course of the next 15 minutes, how do I actually build a relationship with the client that I'm meeting with, and how do I bring value to that client. See, what I have learned over the course of the last 17 months that I've now been in Trinont is I have learned that everything that we do in the CNA process sets up the foundation and the tone for that individual who is just getting started with us in Trinont. And also it sets the tone if we are doing a CNA for somebody who is not in the business, but we're doing a CNA for somebody who is just a customer of our core services or just somebody who wanted to go through the education, how we bring value to that person. So before I jump into the actual CNA training and how I flow through the process of a CNA, I want to show you the tools that I bring with me to every single appointment that I do. And these tools are kind of like your tools that you want to carry with you in your, what I call your life agent tool belt. See, if you were a plumber and you were going to go snake out a toilet, you have to bring your tools, right? If you're going to plumb a toilet, you have to bring your tools. It's the same thing in Trinont Life is when we meet with a client, you want to bring your tools to your appointment. So the tools that I use are all able to be found in the back office of Trinont Life's back office. And the first tool that I bring with me to every appointment is the compensation plan and Trinont Life training sheet. So I bring that with me first. And then I also bring another sheet, which is the core services sheet. Okay. And that core services sheet has all of our core services on it, and it also has our retail services on it. So it has everything that is needed when you're talking with this new individual about the business. Now, what I have learned is there's kind of a flow that I go through with somebody who is in the Trinont business versus somebody who is not in the Trinont business. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the differentiations in what I talk about with somebody who's in the Trinont business and somebody that's not in the Trinont business. So first, I just want to share with you, with every single person that I sit down with, the first thing that I'm going to do with that client is I'm going to spend the first 2 to 5 minutes really getting to know the client. Now, the other sheet that's with me at all times, which I didn't show to you, is the CNA sheet. Now, all of you guys should be bringing that as well with you. I do everything electronic on an iPad, and you can do that as well if you do everything electronic, or you could just bring a paper form with you. But that is, of course, going to be your sheet that you're going to document everything on. Now, when I'm sitting down with a client, the first thing I'm going to do is spend that 2 to 5 minutes just getting to know the person that I'm sitting with, or the couple that I'm sitting with if I'm sitting with a husband and wife. Now, what I will ask is some basic questions to get to know them. And I use what I call FORM. FORM, F-O-R-M. There's things that it stands for. So the first couple things that I want to know is, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I want to know, tell me a little bit about your family. How old are you two? When did you get married? Asking them the questions about their family. Do you have any kids? Getting to know the client. Then I will ask them, occupation. What do you do for work? Right? And how long have you been working there? So I'm starting to get to know what they do for work, a little bit about their family. The next thing I'm going to ask them is R. R stands for recreation. And I will ask them, what do they like to do for fun? Do you guys go on family vacations? Do you take your kids to the park? Do your kids play sports? Now I'm going to start to get to know a little bit about them and what they like to do for fun. And then the last thing I'm going to ask them is M. So F-O-R-M. M stands for motivation. And this is where I start to get into some questions about like what motivates them to do what they do, whether at work. And then I'll also ask them what motivated them, if they're in the Trinant business, what motivated them to get started in the Trinant business. And now I'm going to start to learn about what they're excited about creating through the vision of Trinant. So those are the questions that I'm going to start to open up with to get to know that client. And of course, there are other questions that I'll pop in there, but it's really just questions based on the answers that I'm receiving. There's not a specific form, like I just don't go through this specific question, then this specific question. I just flow through it conversationally as I'm talking with that person because I just want to get to know who they are. Then after I have that initial, 2 to 5 minute conversation, I'm actually going to gauge the conversation on whether I'm going to go through the CNA form first with the client and actually fill all that in, or if I'm going to do education with the client first. Now, personally myself, I actually gauge if I'm going to do education with them first or second, just based on my conversation with them. And so, for example, I'll give you just a good example. Usually when I have a client who's really, really young, maybe in their 20s, or maybe even prior to hitting their 20s, or just getting close to their 30s, I might do education with the client first. Then, of course, if I have a client who maybe is in a demographic that's closer to maybe mid-40s, early 50s, or even in their 60s, I actually might go through the CNA form first. That's kind of how I do it. So that's just my personal preference. You as an agent can kind of guide yourself based on what you think works best for you. So I will do either education first or I will complete the CNA form with them. So I'm just going to go off of if I would go through the CNA form first. If I go through the CNA form first with a client, what I'm going to do is I'm obviously just going to follow through the boxes and start to ask them about what I see in all those different boxes on the CNA form. So the first heading is obviously all the stuff about their occupation, their date of birth, their contact information. So within my first 2 to 5 minutes, I would have already gathered that data. Now, the next set of questions is all about their goals, their business goals, their long-term financial goals, and whatever things that they want to have for retirement. So I will start to then ask them questions about their goals. And one of the biggest questions I always ask a person, especially obviously if they're in the business, is I will ask them, tell me why you got started in Trinant. What did you see was possible for yourself? And what did you want to create in terms of residual income in the business of Trinant? See, I want to know the numbers of why what that person wants to create in the business. Because when I go to do education with that Trinant associate, I'm actually going to train them on the compensation plan and how the compensation plan works so they know how they can make the money. Okay? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as I get closer through the training. Then after I get through their business goals, I ask them about, I ask them one big question that kind of helps me gauge a little bit about them is I will ask them if they had $10 million in their bank account today and all the time in the world, what would they do? What would they do with it? See, all of us, we would love to make more money, but the big thing that really starts to get to know a person is when you really get to know what would they do with that money once they create it. So I always like to ask that question because then it kind of tells me the personality of who it is that I'm working with. Okay? Then I will ask them their long-term financial goals. What is it that you're wanting to create with Trinant? Long-term, if you were looking at retirement, when would you realistically like to retire? Have you thought about that? Would it be in your 60s, 65? And I start to ask them those questions. Then as I flow through the process of the CNA, I'm just going through income first. Tell me about your income. Tell me about your expenses. Tell me about your long-term assets. Do you have a home? And I start asking them questions about that. I'm not going to go into all the questions of what I asked through, but as you know, I'm just flowing through box by box that you see on the CNA form. Okay? Then the bigger things that I want to know is as I'm asking them these questions, the biggest thing as we get to expenses and we're starting to talk about if they have a home or if they have a long-term plan for retirement, like if they already have a 401k in place or an IRA. The biggest things that I'm wanting to learn is how have they been dealing with money over the course of the last 5, 10, 20 years. And as I'm flowing through that CNA, it starts to help me understand how a person is really working with their money. And the reason I want to understand what's going on in their financial picture as best I can is because after I flow through all the questions, the next component of what I do is going to tie in with the education that I'm now going to do with them. So most of my time, like I was sharing, I either do education first or second. Well, if I'm doing education second and I'm flowing through that CNA form, it actually helps me prepare what I'm going to educate them on if I'm doing education second. So after I get through the process of asking them all the questions about their money, the next big things I'm going to talk to them about is if they have set up their core services. I want to know if they've gotten into their OneView. I want to know if they've set up Defend. I want to know if they have their tax bot and they're using it. And so I will actually check off and mark off if they're using and have set up their services. Now, if the client has not yet set up their services, then the biggest thing I'm going to do is for homework, I'm going to make sure that they are getting back with their upline leader to get the rest of those services activated. And so I will actually edify that process, and whoever their upline licensed or upline leader is, I'm actually going to say to them, Mr. or Mrs. Client, you've got to get back with so-and-so. They're going to help you set up all of these services so that you can actually start gaining the benefit of what it is that we're doing here. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do as I gauge the conversation through the questions that I asked, if I ask them about expenses and I'm finding out that they don't have a clue what's going on with their expenses, they don't know what they're spending on groceries or gas or their utilities, then that tells me that they really need to get into OneView and they need to start managing their money. So based on the questions that I'm asking, what I'm finding out is how they're managing money and if they've been saving money will actually allow me to use the core services sheet to then start to talk about the different services that they need to activate. So another big one is, for example, if I talk to somebody and I find out what their credit score is and their credit is not that great, the first thing I'm going to do is, hey, we've got to get you hooked on credit services. Have you started the process to set that up? No, you haven't? Then great. What we're going to do is we're going to have you work with credit services. I will give them this sheet that has the website on it so that they can set up credit services. And so my homework to them is I'm actually going to write that all down on this core services sheet that the client is then going to take home with them. Now, this is something that is usually for a Trinant associate or a core customer. Now, if you're sitting with somebody who is not a Trinant associate or not a Trinant customer yet, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to that client about what services are going to help them based on what I discovered as I was doing the CNA process. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to discover what it is the need, and I'm going to walk through the different core services that I see as a fit for what it is that they need assistance with. If they need to go back and do taxes, I'm going to talk to them about our tax services. And this is such a big thing for you to understand, especially if you're working with individuals who have been referred to you that are non-Trinant associates or non-Trinant customers, because you will help whoever referred you that client, you will actually help them get a new customer. And guess what? If you help sign up a new customer, then that person who referred you the CNA, they're going to get really excited that you just helped them get a new customer, and they're going to want to bring you more referrals. So if you do this successfully and flow through the CNA in the manner where you discover what the need is, then you bring value to that client, you're going to get more referrals and more business because people are going to know that you're providing value to their friends and family. Okay? So now, after I've gone through the CNA, the next thing that I've got to do is I'm going to go through that education sheet with that person. Now, if this person is an individual that is a non-Trinant associate, then I am actually going to skip the entire compensation plan on the sheet. I'm going to skip the whole compensation plan. I'm not even going to go through it because they're not in the business. They don't know anything about the compensation plan. So what I'm going to flow through then is I'm going to talk to them about insurance, and I'm going to give them a basic understanding of term versus whole life versus index universal life. And the picture that I want to help create for them is so that they understand a basic understanding of the differences between these types of insurance. Everything that I do is coming from an education standpoint. So I want to make sure that they just understand the differences between those insurances. And I also want to help them understand that when they look at index universal life insurance, how they can understand how they have the component of building a permanent insurance policy while also being able to build up cash value that they can earn interest on that can be used down the road for many different things like smart banking, that they can borrow against their cash value for things like maybe purchasing a car down the road or a down payment on a home or whatever the case is. I want to educate that client on how smart banking works. Then, most importantly, I want to help them understand some of the tax benefits on understanding that with insurance, their death benefit on their policy actually passes on income tax free. And then I also want to help them understand that when they access that cash value, that they can access that money as well using a policy loan provision, and they can access that money as well tax-free through the policy loan provision. So as I'm flowing through the education, I'm really just starting to educate them on the basics of how does insurance work and what are some of those benefits long term. Then as I flow through the back of it, I want to help them understand the power of having a floor inside of an index universal life, the power of never losing money if you have a big crash in the market. And I will just explain the basic differences if they were in an account that has variable rates of returns. So if they were to directly put their money into the S&P 500 as it shows on that chart, I want to show them what would happen if they took the losses with the gains. Then I'm going to also show them what's the difference if they didn't take a loss at all, which would be in an index universal life, right? They have a floor of 0.25%. So I want to help them paint that picture and help them understand what the difference of their money would be long term if they straight compounded their money and never took a loss. So that's what I'm going to show them on the chart. Then I'm going to flow through the top, which is the time is money column. And this is basically just showing them the power of compound interest and showing them the power of if they learn how to start early, what that can do over time when they're growing their money. And an analogy, so this is a pro tip for you guys, an analogy that I love to use all the time is when with a client, as I say, look, think of it like this. Your money takes time to grow, very similar to a lemon tree. And I ask them, I say, if you were going to plant a lemon tree in your backyard today, Mr. and Mrs. Client, would you be able to pick lemons from that tree tomorrow? And they'll look at me and they'll say, no, of course I wouldn't be able to do that. And then I ask them, I say, why? Why would you not be able to do that? And very simply put, they said, well, because the lemons haven't grown yet and the tree hasn't grown yet, because it takes time. That's usually kind of the answer that I get. And I said, exactly. I said, well, you have to think of your money as the same thing. Your money takes time to grow. And the more time you give your money to grow, that's where the power of compound interest plays into your money over time. And that's just a simple analogy that kind of gets the light bulb to go off for individuals that I like to share with them. So that is my flow of how I kind of flow through a CNA. Most of the time, as I shared with you previous, I'm doing the CNA first and then going into education. But there are some times where I go through education first and then go into the CNA. Now, there is no right or wrong way to do that. You will find what your comfort level is. In the beginning, when I was first learning, I was actually starting with education, then going into the CNA. And now that I've just been doing this for such some time, over 17 months now, I have actually just gotten used to kind of flowing through it based on how I gauge that conversation with the client. Now, I hope you found this helpful and in how you go through the flow of a CNA. But more importantly, the biggest thing that I want you to understand is bring value to your customer. If you bring value to your customer, they are going to love you to pieces forever. But more importantly, they're going to bring you referrals. And see, I am so focused on value that every time before I even get into illustrating and doing the second part of the CNA, before I get into illustrations and showing them illustrations, I want to make sure that I've educated them and brought them so much value that when I get to a point where I'm going to start showing them illustrations of what a plan would look like, they don't even feel like they're being sold an insurance policy because they are so ready to get into something because I brought so much education to the table. And so I want to share that with you guys because if you focus on value and education, you are never going to have a client feel like they're being sold an insurance policy. And that's what I love about what we do at Trinant Life is we lead with education. And when you lead with education, people will automatically put themselves into a plan because now they understand the differences and they see the value of what we can do in an index universal life insurance policy. So, the last big thing that I want to share with you guys, if you are working with somebody who is in the Trinant business. Now I went through the CNA form of the education form of what you would do if you're talking to a non-Trinant associate. But if I'm working with somebody who is in the business, I'm going to focus on this compensation, and I'm actually going to talk to them on how do they build the residual income that they shared with me in their business goals. How do they build that in our compensation plan? See, this is the big crucial part that if you want to become successful in helping your team win and win big, you want to make sure that you're not just providing them education from the standpoint of what the life insurance will do long term, but if you're working with an associate, you want to show them the power of how they can generate income. Because this is where, if you teach them how they can generate income, now they have the power that when they start to generate the residual income, because now they know how to build it, now they have the ability that they could potentially shave years off of retirement because, again, if they're generating more residual income, that's potentially more money over time that they can start gearing towards a plan if they so choose. And guess what? That could help shave years off their retirement or years off of when they would like to retire because they're putting more money into the plan. So do not forget that when you're going through education, you want to make sure that you're going through that compensation plan and explaining how do they make the money. How can they make the money off of the customers by getting 10 to 35% on their personal customers? How do they build to the executive rank? How do they build to financial consultants and qualify for that Jeep stipend, right? So I'm going through those components with them so they can understand how to make the money. And more importantly, at the end of that whole process, when I'm talking to somebody who's a Trinant associate, the biggest thing that I'm going to share with them next is I'm actually going to ask them, I'm going to say, did you find value in what we went through today? And they're always saying, yes, oh my gosh, I learned so much. I understand how the compensation works. I understand how the whole picture fits together. I understand it all. And I say, great. Now that you understand how to make the money, you're getting a plan in place to protect your family and your future. Now that we've done that, the next big thing that I want you to do is we want to start to create a list of those individuals that you want to share this with first, that are going to get value in this education, just like we went through the education with you. We're going to go through this education with them as well. But the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we get in front of them. So that is how I flow through the CNA, and that's how I get the Trinant associate to understand that now that we've gotten through this step 2, now let's take you into step 3 to help you generate more income and potentially shave more years off of when you're going to retire. And now I set up the tone to actually bring that person back into the network marketing side of our business to actually have their first home meeting and start to share the value of our education with their family and friends. So I hope you found value in today, guys. I'm super grateful to be able to do this training, and I'll talk to you guys all really, really soon. Take care.